Hello everyone and welcome to today's Cambridge University Press ELT webinar. I'm Alistair Horn and I'm very pleased to welcome back once again Deirdre Cijffers as today's presenter. Deirdre is a teacher trainer who's been involved in teaching and teacher development for the last 14 years and has taught English in 7 countries over the course of her career. She has an MA in online and distance education and has used blended learning with both students and teachers. She now works with teachers and institutions to help them get the best out of teaching and learning online. Over to you, Deirdre.
Hello, and welcome to Using Data to Inform Your Teaching. There's been a lot of hype about data lately, and that teaching is changing shape as a result of it, and we all need to be on board with what's going on. So today we're going to have a look at what kinds of data are out there, what we can use, and how it affects us. So if we just have a little look at what we're going to run through. So what is data? It's basically information, but what does this particular word mean in this particular context? So what can we see? What do we actually get to look at that helps us make decisions? Where do we get it from? So there are specific places that we get it from. You can't just pull it out of the air, sadly. And then who is it for? Who is going to look at it? What people get to see it? And really, whose problem is it? And I use the word problem in the loosest sense. It just means, what do we want to do about it? What questions does the data answer? So it's all very well having information, but if it's not information that you need in order to do something, then it's not necessarily information that you want to use. So in this case, looking at what it is and seeing how that affects you and what problems it helps to solve, then we can see practical applications. And then what do we do about it once we have that information? So there's lots of different types of information. What kind of insights do they give us, and what action can we take as a result of having these? And then if you want to know a bit more about it later on, don't take my word for it, but if you want to look it up, the keywords really that you're looking for are data-driven instruction and data-driven teaching. So it's not the title that we went for today, because really we want to think about teaching properly and just using the data to inform that rather than it being, a bit more scientific sounding, data-driven. But if you're looking for articles or blogs, etc., then data-driven instruction, data-driven teaching are the search terms for you. So go and have a look at those and compare and contrast with the things that we talk about today. So let's get to it. So the data itself, there is data for students and there is data for teachers. So I'm going to give you some examples from the Cambridge LMS, which is the type of place that you will get data from. And it has specific views for students to see data, a specific type of information that they'll see. And then there are views for teachers and the kinds of information that they'll see. An LMS, as I'm sure you know if you're in this type of webinar at all, is a learning management system where you keep the content or the courses that you're working on, and the LMS tracks student behavior and success. So most LMSs will do most things. There will be a different combination of functionalities in each one, but really more or less they should all show the same things in general. So if we have a look at some of the things that students can see, now these are examples again from the Cambridge LMS, as I mentioned. So they're really just very simple things. So on this page that we can see here, on the left-hand side, we have 3 questions. One is correct, one is wrong, and one is wrong. So from the student's point of view, we can see checked answers. Now this is often sold to people as instant feedback, and indeed that is the message that goes out, and that's what students are after. They want instant feedback, but what they're actually getting is whether an answer is correct or wrong. It's not necessarily that informative a set of information. So just because something is wrong, what does that mean? What do I then do with it? What do I need to do in order to get it right the next time? Do I just guess a different option? Or do I go away and study something in particular and come back and look at it again? So this is something that teachers need to help students with. Then students also in the Cambridge LMS get an indication of how far through a module or an activity they are. So it's effectively, it's like bookmarking, really. It just tells them where they are and where to start again. When you're a teacher going in looking at that, their progress helps you see how long they've taken to do something, how difficult it might have been, whether they stopped because they got stuck or they stopped because they got bored. So there are various interpretations that the teacher can make based on the student's progress through the material. But for students, it's really just a guide as to where to start again. The next one is reports. So this is the key one that students and teachers are really into, is seeing scores. So what percentage did I get for that activity? How much time did I spend on it? The time is not as interesting to students, but they can access that information if they want to. Some students who come to do a language course have been sponsored by their employer, perhaps, and their employer will stipulate that they have to do 20 hours worth of study, for example. They do 10 hours with a teacher. So how does the employer know that they're doing the other 10 hours? They know because of the time spent, so they want to see this information. This isn't something for most students, but it's really just in certain contexts. So in terms of scores, we like to see percentages, and we like to see how far through different activities we are. When we come on to teacher information, so again, in our LMS, we have overview information for the whole class. So you can see in the slide here, we have a visual representation of the breakdown of grades in the class. So as you can see, we've got a very average class. So a lot of my students are getting C's, but some are getting B's, and there are some that I really need to look after. So I've got this information. What do I do with it once I've processed that? So that's my overall for the students for the whole course at this particular moment. Then we have on the same page we have individual students' details. So these are the numbers that make up that graphic. So it has things like score, progress, when it was last accessed, and their overall grade at the end. So there's various ways to look at this, and it's a quick glance at an overview of each student, an overview of the class, but within it you can kind of quickly see if someone's falling behind or racing ahead. We're still looking at the overview here. So if we look at each individual unit, we can also see average scores. So when you're working in the flipped classroom, and we'll talk about a little bit about that in a minute, what you need is not individual scores necessarily, but you need average scores for the class and average progress to see how you need to plan your lesson, more or less, aiming at the average in the group. So you'll have to accommodate people who are very strong, people who are very weak, but you're still aiming your kind of standard lesson or the beginnings of your lesson will be aimed at the median. So this is where you would find that information. And you'll also get, again, per unit. Let's imagine we've just finished Unit 4 and I've asked the students to do the work. There's a visual representation very easily displayed for you to see, okay, where do I really need to address this group that's only getting 0 to 20%. So this is just a nice way of seeing your class in a more generalized way. When you've done that and you've seen how well your class is doing on average, then you'll need to have a look at each person and see how they're doing individually and in comparison with the rest of the class. So as teachers and assessors, we often rightly or wrongly compare students to the other students in the class, but in this case we have a very obvious way of doing that, so we can see that scores are slightly lower, slightly higher. So you can guess what the kind of more or less the average line that you want the students to be achieving, and if students are far below that then need to take action and look after them and help them get to the same score as everyone else or beyond. So in our LMS we have a score for each unit, and we have a score for each section, and we have a score for each exercise, and attempts for each exercise are also graded and recorded. So if a student does this exercise 6 times, we will see attempt 1, attempt 2, attempt 3, and the highest score of all those attempts is recorded. So this is how the overall score is calculated. But it just means that you have a lot of detail that you can drill down into. So if you have a student who's not doing very well, are they not doing very well overall, or is there a specific exercise type that they're struggling with, or is it a particular language point that they're struggling with? You can see that in a lot of detail. So the more detail you have to go into for individuals, the more time it's going to take you to prepare your lessons. So looking more generally at preparing your lessons and aiming those towards the kind of average, but then making sure that you have accommodations for weaker students and stronger students, that you'll be able to tell all of that about each person from the data that's here. And the last one, again, the same as for students, teachers can see time spent and the last time students access something. So if you've got a student who hasn't actually accessed the LMS in a month, then maybe they've got a problem. Maybe their laptop was stolen. Maybe they have a family problem that is preventing them from study. You've got various things that you need to do to address that. Hopefully you don't have students who go missing for a month, but you know, it's there. They can't hide from the numbers. So I've seen all the numbers. So those are just some examples of the kinds of information that you can get and how they can help you. So what do you do when you have that? And if we take the same order as before and we look at the students first. So if the students are the ones doing the interpreting, then they're sitting there thinking, well, what does this mean? So if we think about the first one, where you just get correct or incorrect. Okay, so it's correct or incorrect. Maybe I'll think about it again and try again, or maybe I just genuinely don't understand what's going on, in which case, how do I fix that? So their first port of call is always going to be the teacher. So the teacher is going to have to sort that out. But what does the teacher have to do in order to support them, to train them, and get them up to speed, and get them to understand what the numbers mean and what the so-called instant feedback really means for them in their context. And then the same questions for teachers. What does the information mean? Okay, so this person got 26% while the class got 90%. What does that mean? What do I have to do with this person to help bring them up to speed? Do I take them and put them in a different level, or do I give them one-to-one lessons outside of class? Do I take them aside during class? What is the actual action that the teacher has to take to make it better? So really, the main questions for students and for teachers is, what do I do next? So when we think about the whole notion of learning-oriented assessment, if we're looking at the data provides the information about the mini assessment that the students have just completed. Even though it's not testing, it just shows you how well they did. And so they've done that, but the whole point is then to be able to make a decision that will assist their learning, that will either raise their score or mean that they will do the next exercise in fewer attempts. What do they have to do next to make that useful, make that a useful exercise for them? So we need to work on things like reflection, on analyzing the language types that they're doing, on linking up the exercise that they're doing now with the learning objectives for the unit that they're working on. And that can be over discussion. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it just means signposting a little bit better to the students and making sure that they know what they're doing. So if you have a student who only gets 26 when the class got 90, what does the teacher have to do next? Well, it's very simple. The teacher needs to talk to the students. So you need to have a chat. When we take them aside, if they're that far below the best of the class, then there's something is not going right. So you need very much to find out what's going on. So, so you've had your chat with a student. There are three main areas that students might have issues in. So there's technical issues, affective issues, and academic issues. So when we're looking at technical issues, we're thinking about things like what devices are they working on? Do they have access to devices at all? Are they sharing them? Are they available to them? We're thinking about the capability of the devices. Do they have browsers? Are they fast enough, etc.? And what browsers are they using? Are they the right versions of those? And do the students have the technical ability to use their own devices or the devices that are shared from the institution? So those are they're not very interesting. They're not very teacher-centric problems, but they are things that we need to address at the beginning of term, and we'll talk about those again in a second. The second set of potential issues are affective. So it's a bit more kind of emotional on this front. So we're looking at personal issues. Do they have a car that's broken down, or a sister who's just had a baby, or whatever? You know, there are other things going on in their lives that are distracting them from the very important task of learning English. And in addition to that, there are motivational issues. So they've got nothing going on in life, everything's perfect. What might be stopping them from really engaging with the course, engaging with the content, and being excited about what they're doing? And then we've got the academic side, so the content, the actual language itself, and the delivery, so how we're teaching the language that they're supposed to be getting on with. So normally when we see low scores, our instant reaction is that it's a content-related problem. And in fact, motivational issues are often to blame for these types of things. So we'll look at how we address those in a moment. Technical is really, it's not, you don't need to be very well versed in pedagogy to know that students will have technical problems, but also to know that they will use the technical side of things as the number one excuse for not doing their homework. So we have a colleague who was very frustrated that his students all seemingly had browser problems and problems with the site. A lot of students coming to him saying, oh, the site went down when I was doing my homework. I'm so sad. So his response to this was, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Please send me a screenshot of the problem and we'll sort it out right away. And strangely enough, the problem almost disappeared overnight, because if the student had to send a screenshot of the site being down or under maintenance, then obviously they never logged on and found the site under construction, if you like, so they couldn't send a screenshot. So while they were there, they just got on and did their homework. So just being quite open and honest about that kind of thing is really helpful from the very beginning, just to deal with those excuses. But there are technical issues that they will have to face. So as we mentioned, the devices, their browsers, etc. There are technical requirements for what they're about to use. These are things that you have information about before you start. Just make sure that everybody's aware of them, and make sure that you know that your equipment is up to scratch, and then you're going to have to help the students potentially do that. Sometimes your students are going to be much better at doing that than you are, but you still need to be there and be the person who can potentially support them if they need you. The other thing, once you know that the hardware is done, you need to train your learners. So they need to be able to get to the online components you've asked them to use. They need to be able to get around them, to find the different parts of them, and to complete the tasks you set them. So if you're setting them fill in the gaps exercises, they need to know how to do those. If you're asking them to do a forum activity, they need to know how to do that. So it's not just a technical thing, but it's an ability within the specific program that you're using. It's not difficult to do, but it's, you have to do it at the beginning as part of your orientation to get past that, so that it is no longer an obstacle as you go through the course in much more challenging areas like critical thinking and reflection and writing longer text, etc. You don't want to be bothered by technical issues. So again, the data can show you where there are gaps, and one of those gaps could be technical. Looking more on the effective side of things, as we mentioned before, it can be personal issues that are distracting the students from the core task of learning English. And in this, you have absolutely no control over the health of their mothers, but you can be a person who is supportive for 5 minutes, and they feel better and go away and live their lives and feel slightly more motivated. It's just something to recognize that you don't really need to do anything more than that. What you do need to work on, though, is motivational issues. So if they're absolutely fine, but they're just not logging on, or they're logging on and they're not doing the exercises, or they're coming to class and coming up with an excuse every single time, then you have a motivational problem. So there are 3 different ways of going about this, and we did a webinar on motivation not long ago. So you really need to look at your framework of assessment. Are you assessing what the students did online? And are you assessing what they have learned, what they can show you they've learned in class based on what they've done online? So you need to give them a grade for doing the work online at all, but then you also need to give them a grade that they can work towards in class, that they will, and if they've done the work beforehand online, then they'll get a good grade in the performance in class. If they haven't, they're not going to get such a good grade in class. So that way you're assessing the online work twice, which means that for students who are very extrinsically motivated, then you have a double whammy to get them in and doing work. The other side is engagement with the process of learning. So highlighting their learning goals, highlighting their goals on a class-by-class basis, and also on a career level basis. Why are you doing this at all? How does what we're doing work in or fit in with what you're trying to achieve overall? And then regular encouragement. So when we think about motivation, often we ask them to do things before we think about the framework of assessment or we think about engagement, which then means that for the duration of the semester, we have to do this encouragement all the time. Come on, do your homework, do your homework. But actually, if we set it up with the previous 2 points first, then the regular encouragement is just an extra push rather than being the entirety of our motivational strategy, if you like. So those are things that we need to look at. And again, the data will reveal when someone is falling behind. And if this is one of the issues, having had your chat, then you need to address it on a wider scale. So the academic side, so with content, they just don't understand the language. They just don't get it. And often we can despair of students who potentially are a bit more technical than linguistic, or they've got strength in other areas and just not in the one that we're trying to teach them. But what do we do with them? Do we just explain it again and then again, or do we force them through the same material online again and again? Or what are we going to do? Are we going to change the way that we teach? So delivery-wise, the way that the language is being taught doesn't speak to them. So by this I mean maybe we do a lot of explanations, but the students need to be more active, or maybe we do a lot of a certain type of activity which appeals to people who have more visual preferences, but not enough that appeals to people who have auditory or kinesthetic preferences. So there are ways of changing and varying what we do that makes the lesson speak to them and resonate with them a bit better. So by this, I don't mean that the way the language is being taught is rubbish, it doesn't mean that, oh, okay, I'm a bad teacher, I should just give my students to someone else. That's not what I mean. What I mean is that we have a whole range of possibilities of ways to teach individual language points or individual sub-skills, and if the data is showing that the students are not learning as fast as we would like, then maybe we need to adjust the way our general approach. So there are a couple of ways that we think about data and think about teaching differently. So it's not always the content, and it can often be the delivery, which makes the content more accessible. Okay, so we have data. We're supposed to look at the data, and then from our interpretations and our conversations with the students, then we plan the lessons, and then everybody wins. We make perfect lessons every single time. How amazing. Is that really how it works, or are there obstacles to how that actually happens? So there are two different ways that we need to approach this to make the data really work for us. So time and deadlines. So the data is important, but you need to get it in time to be able to plan a lesson. And then we're going to look also at taking a longer view, and rather than doing a lesson-by-lesson approach, but changing our approach in general to something that is a little bit different from what we've done before, that might reach more of our students. So I'm sure you've all seen an upside-down classroom before. So the flipped classroom, this is essentially where data comes into its own. It's very, very important in the flipped classroom. So we have students doing preparation alone at home before they come to class, so doing their homework first, essentially, and then coming to class to do the practice, the consolidation, and doing the communicative activities. So the data is super important in this context. So the students are preparing at home, they're doing whatever it is that you set them, and then the teacher checks the data. Did they do the work at all? Did they do it well? And then from that, the teacher can tailor the lesson to those strengths and weaknesses and maximize the communication. So rather than using the lesson to re-explain language that they've looked at already, we look at ways of using the language for eliciting responses and helping them to understand a bit more inductively. So this is the ideal situation. Now we have, in order to manage the flipped classroom, I mean, this could be something quite familiar to many of you, or maybe it's something that seems quite alien. So imagine that on Tuesday we have a class, and then we don't have another class until the following Tuesday. So there's a week in between. So after the first class, traditionally, we would have provided homework. So the class leads on to that homework, and the homework is consolidation of what we did in the class. That's fine, we're all used to this. You know, there's nothing surprising in that. But with the flipped classroom, we don't have homework anymore. Nobody likes homework. So we've decided we're not doing homework. Fine. So instead, we're doing preparation. So it's preparation for the class for next Tuesday, not consolidation for the class last Tuesday. So what we need to do is we need to plan ahead. So even by the first class, we know what we want to do in the second class so that we can assign appropriate preparation to prepare for the second class. So this all, on the part of the teacher, requires a lot of forward thinking, which when you have a lot of classes can seem quite daunting. So you might just want to experiment with it with one or two lessons and see how you go first of all. And this is the ideal situation. So we have preparation, then we check the data, then we prepare our lesson, and then we have class, and it's all wonderful. But what will often happen is that if we set preparation for Tuesday's class, the preparation will be done on Monday night. Then Tuesday morning, we, the teachers, we wake up, we brush our teeth, we have breakfast, we have our coffee, we get to work. You see the data 5 minutes before class starts, and when do you do the planning? When does this wonderful class appear? So there are a couple of ways that we can approach this. So one way is, in order to get the preparation done in a reasonable time frame, we need to set a deadline. So we imagine the preparation has to be finished by Monday, so that by Monday morning, so that the teacher has all day Monday to prepare the classes for Tuesday. And this requires a little bit of management and a lot of engagement with the students to get them to buy into this and to do what you ask. But it is one way of making sure that you've got that gap so that you can check the data to see how they've done and then prepare the class accordingly. So it's not complicated, but it's potentially a different way to do it. Because when we assigned homework, it didn't matter when they did it. As long as they did it between the two classes, it was fine, because the second class didn't depend on the homework. So once you've done this, you then have to deal with, so what do I do? What do I do in class now? So we will have a look at trusting the students. Do we trust the students? Will they do this? Did we trust them to do homework? And if we did, do we still trust them to do preparation? Or are we going to review our assessment policy? So as I mentioned before, changing how you give grades for the work they do online and the work that they do in class, in order to encourage them more strongly to participate. You need to plan ahead, so not just knowing what you're doing in this lesson, but having a clear, if not precisely planned, idea of what you're going to do in your next class. And you need to be quite flexible. So you need to plan lessons that are quite flexible, that with activities that are quite flexible, and so that you're not totally rooted to one possibility only. And then you need to be quite flexible within the lesson. So when it comes to doing flipped teaching, you, the teacher, are not always the center, and you need to let the students take the lead a little bit more. So they've done all the input, what they need to practice and flex their muscles, and you need to be able to give them the opportunities to do that and support them in that, which can be a little scary if that's not the way you're used to teaching. But it is possible, honest. And once you've done all of this, then you need to go back to your data, check it. Is this approach helping the students? If it is, great, keep going. If the results are still a bit shaky, then maybe you need to have a look at another approach as well. But one of the dangers with trusting the students, even if you've reviewed your assessment policy, is that they may still turn up to class having not done it. So what you need to do is plan your activities such that they're communicative. So we want to get maximum communication, but that the activities are simple but open-ended, that the instructions are basic enough to allow weaker students to complete the task, but they're open-ended so that confident students can explore and extend and be more creative in the way that they complete the task, so that you've got one basic idea that you want to do in the classroom, but that you can accommodate stronger students, weaker students, and students who haven't bothered doing their preparation as well. So you have a lot of, you have the possibility of making the lesson work every time without having to scrap your lesson plan. And again, we're looking at the data afterwards to see if this has results or not. The data, really, we're just adding to our own set of impressions of how the lesson went and of how well the students learned. But when we see the data, it's a few days later. So it's those impressions of how much they've remembered as well as how much they understand in the moment. So going back to our reactive teaching, so looking at data, planning lessons, and everybody wins, maybe. So you've just looked at using time and deadlines and planning ahead, etc. That's very much on a lesson-by-lesson basis. So flipped classrooms are very much lesson-by-lesson, plan quite far ahead, and it can be quite stressful to move into that way of teaching straight away. So you might not want to leap straight in to the flipped classroom. But give it a go, see how you do for a few times, and if it works for you and your students, then maybe you can formalize it later. But it's not necessarily going to be the first thing that you want to do tomorrow. So what you can do, using the data again, we can take a bit of a longer view. So we're not changing our lesson from tomorrow, we're not changing our lesson from Friday. We're looking at our approach to teaching much more generally. So if we take a more reflective route, you look at your lesson, you can look at the data and see how well they did. But in your reflection, you think, okay, well, how did I teach that? How did the students react in class? Did all the students react in the same way? How did everybody feel about that activity? How did I feel about that activity? Was there enough opportunity to consolidate what we did? And did I review and concept check this enough? And what were my other options for doing this? What else could I have done to make that more realistic or more useful? And once you've done this, and you think a lot about how did I teach that? Did you explain it? Did you show them a video? Did you ask them comprehension questions? Did you do a task? How did you teach it? And then you think about when we did our studies of teaching, there were plenty of options. So, we've got task-based learning, we've got test, teach, test, we've got presentation, practice, produce, or produce, practice. I never remember which way around that goes. We've got portfolio teaching, which is kind of a mix between teaching and assessment that works in a lot of reflection on the part of the students. We've got projects, which are very simple to open-ended, so they're very appropriate for the flipped classroom. And you've got more inductive approaches. There are lots of things out there. You don't have to change your methodology in its entirety, but borrow activities from different methodological types, so that you're not just experimenting within your usual range of reference, but you're experimenting with all of the stuff that's out there and see what your students react to. And again, check with the data. Did it work? Did it not work? So essentially, what the data allows you to do is it gives you that information and that prompt to try something new. So is it going to be a flipped classroom approach, in which case you need to look at the planning and the deadlines, etc.? Or is it going to be different activity types or different ways of interacting with the students, allowing them to lead a little bit more? But it's definitely something new and different for you and for your students. And then afterwards, you can check with the data and see whether that worked. So you add the data to your own impressions of how it went in the classroom, reflect on it with all the questions that you had, and cross-reference that with the data. So the data is a bit more objective. So you're not thinking that confident students are amazing automatically, which is a very easy assumption to make, but you're looking at how the personalities and the levels of confidence match with the levels of knowledge of smaller items of information. So that's basically it. I'm not telling you all to go and jump off a cliff, but but that's the general idea. So you need to launch yourself into something new and exciting, and the data can hopefully help you see whether that's going well or not. Thank you very much.
Okay, so thank you very much, Deirdre. I'm delighted to hear that you're not suggesting that our audience should jump off a cliff as a result of your session today. But do we have any questions? Yeah, so brilliant. We've just had the first question in from Juliana Jelencic, who asks, which tools can we use to create tasks for students, Web 2.0 tools?
Well, there are plenty of them. I think forums lend themselves quite easily to the types of discussions that we do anyway in the ELT classroom. So you can quite easily replicate discussions, debates, things where people go off and do research, come back and share the ideas together. And the data that you'll get from those tools is less numerical. It's obviously much more qualitative. So it relies on the teacher monitoring the activity, and monitoring the activity in order to be able to do that in a way that preserves your sanity, you need to set up the activity point quite well in quite a structured way in order to get the students to do something that's easy for you to monitor and then to be able to react to when you get into the classroom later on. But forums are great if you want to do collaborative writing and editing and things, which is definitely a part of peer correction, self-correction, critical thinking. Wikis are a very good way to go. If you're starting, if it's your first go, I would stick with forums. You've also got blogs for more reflective writing, longer term, over the course of the term. There are portfolios, which are also very reflective, but to specific pieces of writing that are done throughout the semester. There are lots of different options, but if I were you, I would just pick one and really explore that for a term, and then maybe pick another one and explore that, and then see which works best for you and your students.
Okay, thanks. Question now about, you've been talking very much about using data from your own students and looking at it sort of quite intensively on a small scale. What about working with other teachers and looking at a sort of at a larger scale, looking at essentially big data and looking at how your colleagues and perhaps even teachers and students and other institutions are doing? Can you think of any ideas about that, please?
Well, I think that's a great idea. If you have the infrastructure to be able to gather all that data, that's fantastic. I mean, what we're looking at today is just to inform your teaching, but if you're looking at gathering that data in order to make generalizations about how people in your country, for example, the kinds of mistakes that they make or the kinds of teaching methods or activities that they respond well to, then I think it's a brilliant idea to be able to get those ideas together and to get that information together. It also forms very compelling arguments for getting different equipment or training in order for you and your group of teachers to be able to teach in that new way a bit better.
Sorry, just a slight bump in the microphones there. We're also wondering about, just a question from Katerina Lukenchenko, who says whether there are any examples from your own practice that you've put online of how you've applied this.
I use this in a number of teacher training courses that I do. So the teachers work it's kind of a flipped fashion. They do some work online, and I check the data to see how well they've managed with different concepts, and also to see how well they've managed with working online at all. And then afterwards we have live sessions via WebEx. Not quite like this, as in much smaller groups, so we would do sessions with 6 to 10 people, so that it's much more discursive and more like a workshop really than a presentation. And we work through those. And my planning of those workshops depends heavily on the information that I've gotten from the reports, etc.
Okay, thanks. A follow-up question from Katerina, who's wondering if you could give any links to any of the forums you've used. Or is that
inside Cambridge LMS, which is the courses that I run are in the Cambridge LMS. When I worked with my students, I think I used Google. Google was a major contributor to most of my online teaching with students. But yeah, really, most of the forums I would do are attached to where the courses are kept, which is inside an LMS of some kind.
So if you're using a blended course, then use the tools from that. Otherwise, there are some free tools available.
If you're looking at using data, more than likely you are using an LMS, you are using a course, and because the data needs to be easily tracked across your semester, and that can only really happen if you're using a course within a tool that will track that. And if you've got your students using that, it doesn't necessarily make sense to send them outside that tool to find another tool. So yes, there are free tools, but it's better it's better for the students to only have to log into one thing, to only have to be familiar with one tool. So yeah, I would pick up one thing.
Okay, thanks. A question from Bashira Bookman, who thinks, which I think ties in a little with that. Do students need to do all the tasks on the LMS for the data actually to be representative of what they're doing?
No. There are various ways that you can apply the online content, if you like. So you can ask them to do absolutely everything, which may or may not be of use, but it will mean that the data is very consistent and you don't need to manipulate it. With our gradebook, for example, you can include or exclude items from the final grade. So if you want, for example, exercise 1 to be part of the final grade, but exercise 2 is just not really as important, then you take it out of the overall grade. So that effectively means that exercise 1 is obligatory and exercise 2 is optional, which means that you can have a core of exercises and activities throughout the semester that are obligatory and that you want to see scores for, but that there are other activities for example, for weaker students, so other activities can do those optional activities to bring up their non-graded scores so that you know they're doing the extra practice. But it does mean that there's a certain amount of knowledge that you have to have in order to manage our gradebook. So if you are adopting one of our courses, then we provide training on how to do that. And yes, exactly. So you can select the tasks that are needed to back up the activities in class. So it's very important to be able to pick and choose those things, and not all gradebooks provide that. But we do have the option to make something obligatory. They've done it. The scores are uniform across the board, and then you can plan your lesson. But then you also have these other backup things that you can assign if necessary to help students who are struggling.
Thanks. Thinking now about a school or university setting where you've got a teacher who teaches a class, say, for one semester or 1 year, and then passes that class on to another teacher for the following year. Do you think it would be useful in a circumstance like that to pass over the data that you have on the students to the new teacher? And does that happen?
I don't know if it does happen actually, but I think it would be a very good idea. The issue that might prevent teachers from doing that is that you've got tons of students and lots of classes, and if you've got a lot of data coming in from your previous or your future classes, if you like, then you might not get time to get through all that to prepare for your course. But and also when you move students out of one class, their data might not be there for the next teacher if they're in another class. So it depends on the LMS how that functions. One of the things that, yes, it would be very, very useful to be able to pass over that data, but I think you would need to be quite selective about the data that you share. And if you're giving them absolutely every single last item, 1A was correct, 1B was incorrect. If you've got 40 students in a class, it's going to take you forever to go through. So a general kind of overall picture of how well they did throughout the semester is very helpful, particularly if you're going big data and you're trying to share your impressions throughout the institution. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that.
Okay, thanks so much. Oh, we've just got another question come in from Theodora Gorgescu, who says, what can I do if my students don't care that much if they get a bad grade and don't do the homework? So you're getting the data in, and it's saying they're not performing well, but they're reluctant to be motivated. How can you motivate them?
Well, there are those three things that I mentioned earlier on about changing your assessment strategy. So they might not care that they get a bad grade, but if they have to pass the course in order to get on with the core of their studies that they're actually trying to do, then they care a little bit. But what you really need to do in that particular case is to engage them with the process of learning. So if you're looking at more portfolio style thinking, so thinking about setting goals with them in the beginning, so not just your goals, but their goals today, next year, in 5 years' time, what do they want to do with their careers? How does this course fit into their career, and how does this homework fit in to their goals for the course, to their goals for their career? And if they don't have any goals, you might need to coax them into having something that they want to achieve, even if it's, they want to go on holiday to an English-speaking country and get an English-speaking boyfriend or girlfriend or something. I don't know, meet the love of their lives. They're still going to need to speak English in some context, or understand songs, or really look around, scrape around for reasons for them to be able to speak at least a little. And then for every exercise, keep a note of this, and then for everything that you ask them to do, every activity that they do in class, every activity that they do at home, link it to their short-term and their longer-term goals. So it's a way for them to kind of be kind of motivated slightly intrinsically, but with some heavy encouragement from you. Anyway, that's one of the ways.
Great, thank you very much, Deirdre. So that's all for today, and we'll be taking a little bit of a break from our Tuesday webinars for the summer. So we'll be back in September with a new series with some of the top names in ELT, and I very much hope we'll be having Deirdre back as well. But don't forget that in the interim, you can keep up with all of our news on our Facebook page, on Twitter, on our YouTube channel, and on our blog. And the recording of today's webinar, for anyone who missed maybe the first part of that, that will be up on our blog and on our YouTube channel by the end of this week. And we'll also mention it on our Facebook page and on Twitter. So if you follow us on Facebook or on Twitter, you'll find out what we're doing on YouTube and the blog. And we'll also make an announcement on Facebook, on the blog, on YouTube, on Twitter, and also even on Google Plus of our webinar series for September. So I'd just like to finish for the next month by saying thank you very much to everyone who's attended, and thank you for attending previous webinars as well. Thank you particularly to Deirdre, who's been an excellent presenter yet again, who's one of our favourite speakers in this series. And also, thanks very much to my colleagues Simon and Lucia, who've been helping out today as well. So thanks very much, everybody, and we'll speak to you all again very soon. Bye.